Hello, everyone. Welcome to the weekly crypto recap show. It's wonderful to have you all here for Friday afternoon, where we discuss all of the latest news from the week. And I'm absolutely delighted to have these two gentlemen here. Welcome back to the show, both of you. We have Ben Perrin of BTC Sessions, and we have Chris Karabats of Smart Cash. Thank you for joining me.
Hello. Happy to be here in my new HODL hat.
Yeah.
So I have a question, Chris. Where did you get that HODL hat?
Oh, I think I might have gotten that HODL hat right on this show, or a similar show.
So you were the wonderful winner of our 10-week epic crypto quiz show, Bonanza. And so you went home with a bunch of swag at Consensus Invest this week when I ran into you and could like hand off your wonderful prizes. I handed off glory to you as well, because you won a lot of glory and deep respect from winning that show.
Absolutely. It was great. I had to pick which hat I was going to wear today just to celebrate that fact. And I ended up with the red one. Now my wife says I look like a farmer in my shirt and hat.
I'm farming Bitcoins.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I'm glad that you like all of the swag. If you guys like the swag, you can get it from human-action.net. Awesome group of people. They also have Ross Ulbricht pins where all of the money goes towards the fight against the draconian sentence that the government has imposed on Ross Ulbricht. So I really recommend supporting these guys. Really, really awesome guys. They also have like Mises pins and Hayek pins and all kinds of cool stuff. So check out their stuff. And also, you got a Billfodl wallet, right?
I did.
A keykeeper, I mean.
Yes, a keykeeper.
Awesome. Well, you have to keep us updated on how you find those once you're using them.
Absolutely. They are great, and I will use them.
Cool. All right. So this show today is being sponsored by JR from Exciting World Cryptos. And I am so appreciative of that. You guys would have known JR from all of the chats. He's been a huge supporter of the show since forever. Like, I mean, he's been around for a long time and a good friend. So huge thank you to you, JR, for that. If you guys wanted to check out his videos, so I have 3 videos here that I might link to you, and I'll put them in the information of the YouTube video at the end as well, so you can check those out. But I mean, today we're going to be talking about sanctions on Bitcoin addresses. So actually, JR covered this last month, talking about, you know, what is going to happen now that that there are sanctions. And so he's got a video out. Iran takes on cryptocurrency and sanctions and economics. So I will send that link so you can all check it out. He has an interesting thing about ICO airdrops and things that you need to know about them, and a great explainer video about what is blockchain. So I'll link all of those in the video, but go and send him some love. I'm going to send a little address right now, so you can go head over to his channel and just send him a little bit of love there, and he would really appreciate that. As I said, huge fan of the show and a big supporter and a good friend. So thank you very much, JR, for that. And so let us move into the news from this week. We've got a whole lot of stuff to cover. Obviously, huge news that's going on at the moment. The US Department of Treasury put out a press release. They said that Treasury designates Iran-based financial facilitators of malicious cyber activity, and for the first time identifies associated digital currency addresses. So the idea is that 2 individuals, 2 Bitcoin addresses, have been sanctioned by the US Treasury, and all property and funds are seized. And those dealing with the individuals plus the Bitcoin addresses have also had funds blocked. So let's talk about this and the repercussions of this and what we think.
Yeah, I'll dive in here. So I found this very interesting. That first, funny that they would block 2 individual Bitcoin addresses, just for the simple fact that you can create infinite number of addresses. Not only that, but you have online exchanges that sometimes won't accept coins from certain sources, like if you're on a gambling website, and they look back a certain number of hops, perhaps 4 or 5 hops. But if you get something like the Samurai wallet, they have something called Ricochet, and when you send a Bitcoin transaction, it adds additional hops to your transaction. So for Samurai with the Ricochet, it would end up being 5 hops before it gets to its final destination, thus nullifying the backtracking that something like Coinbase is doing. So
but can I mention something about this 7,000, this 2 addresses? So what blew my mind was reading the press release where they said that over 7,000 transactions in Bitcoin have been processed through these two addresses. You'd think that they would have set up individual addresses that, and not use the same one twice. But instead, they literally, it seems that they just use the same one over and over again. So that struck me. Sorry, continue, Ben.
Yeah, that is a funny point. And I think that in this case, you have criminals that maybe need to catch up to what law enforcement is capable of now. Not that I'm condoning what they're doing, but right, there's always this push and pull where criminals are trying to outpace law enforcement back and forth. This is a case where I think they were going through the practices that they would have gone through a couple of years ago, and they haven't caught up with the times. Now, I do think that it is funny that they would sanction these two individual addresses because, like I said, it's very easy to create new addresses, and there are other technologies, coin joins and so on and so forth, where it nullifies everything that they've done here. And I think it's going to be a continual push and pull. Sure, they can sanction these individual addresses, but that's not going to do much. And I think you'll get to a point where if they say enough hops backwards, you're capturing so much of the innocent market that you're going to end up tainting coins that have never been utilized by a criminal in the past however many transactions. I think it's a ridiculous notion. And I also think that's why we need base layer fungibility and privacy implemented on Bitcoin.
Right.
I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that because this is going to be more of an issue. And the way you're saying that they're going to grab some innocent people in with this sweep as they go a few hops away, you say that as if they think that's a bad thing. They certainly don't mind catching some other Bitcoiners in there. And worst case scenario is these other people have to prove that they're not related to them. And then they have proof that these other people and individuals are associated with these addresses. And that helps them expand their net of knowledge across the address space. It's interesting watching some of the more recent attacks when it's tied into this. You mentioned the Samurai wallet. A few weeks ago, the Samurai wallet posted a warning about a dusting attack. I'm not sure if you read about that, but where you were trying to mix your own coins together so people would send very small Bitcoin transactions to individual addresses. So when you did mix your coins, they would know all the addresses that you had associated with yourself simply from this one little transaction they sent to you. So you just have to be aware of that as you're using your coins, that people are trying to track down what addresses are related to what other addresses across the blockchain space, and be aware of that both for criminals potentially attacking you or governments wanting to know who you are, so they may indeed decide that you are too associated with some criminal or some person trying to bypass sanctions of questionable legality.
Right. And it also brings up the question of, to what extent do we want the government to be able to hunt down criminals? And I mean, we talked a lot about privacy and the need for privacy in financial transactions, but there is a big real issue that there are bad people out there, and law enforcement's trying their best to hunt them down. And I actually covered this topic in a live stream yesterday. I had two cryptography and infosec specialists on the show. One of them was Perry Metzger, who's, very, very privacy oriented. He's, of course, I've interviewed him before. He's the one who runs the mailing list that Bitcoin was first released on. And the other one was a gentleman, Patrick Gray, who runs a podcast in Australia, and really smart guy who knew exactly what was going on with the encryption bill in Australia. But it was fascinating because Perry was very much on the side of, well, we need strong encryption, no backdoors. This needs to be tight. It's a slippery slope. We've got to safeguard our security. And then Patrick was very much on the side of, well, the Australian government doesn't have a track record of doing bad things. They really just want to do the right thing. They're trying their best. And I mean, you laugh, but I mean, he has a point. But I think Perry's point was even stronger, that it takes very little for a government to descend, to start off being, oh, they're pretty good, they don't have a track record, to being, they're terrible, they've destroyed all the individual rights. And so there is, I mean, as much as we don't like to talk about it, there is a push and pull between how much security do we want, how much, you all know me, so I'm very much on the side of individual freedom, but it's still a question to be asked.
Even assuming the best will of the government, even assuming they are just looking out for us, you also have to assume that they won't screw up and leak any of those vulnerabilities, backdoors, information anywhere, which we already know isn't the case. I mean, the IRS over the last several years has leaked how many millions of individuals' tax records out onto the dark web.
Right.
I mean, they didn't mean to do that. I'm not saying the IRS intentionally did that, but that doesn't matter. They gave us no choice in giving them our information, and they have pooped the bed, to keep this PG.
They have pooped the bed. You heard it here, guys. They create a joke card after this show. They have pooped the bed. Exactly.
You literally took the words out of my mouth, though. I was thinking the exact same thing. It's assuming that the government ends up being this perfect entity that can do no ill will towards its constituents. There's still the problem of having this information accessible to one party makes it accessible to all parties if they want to try hard enough to access it. So, what's the trade-off? I'm of the mind that you should be prosecuting the criminal and not the medium through which they execute the crime, right? You're prosecuting people or causing impediments to people that are just utilizing currency regularly instead of going after the specific individuals that are committing the crime. I think that the focus should be put on the detective work to catch the individuals, and everybody else should be assumed that they are regular law-abiding citizens, unless you have reason to believe otherwise. Innocent until proven guilty. I believe that's my take on it.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to interject quickly. So we have a power chat from Derek Belcher. Thank you so much for using the power chat. I've been letting you guys know about Bitbacker for a while now. It's a super new platform. But instead of using the super chat within YouTube, which takes 30% of anything that you're sending to content creators, Bitbacker takes 1%, and you can pay in crypto. And I support that for a number of reasons, not just because I like money being directed to the people it's intended to be directed towards, but also because, you have all these people in the crypto space who have primarily crypto channels, and my channel is basically all about blockchain. And yet I receive the vast majority of my support in fiat money. And so I'd love to see content creators use this so that they can actually be using the currency that they're promoting. So check it out if you haven't already. But Derek asked a question off topic. I'm going to interject anyway because he sent me a power chat, and that's how it works, guys. And he asks, how does it feel to know that the former owner of a topless car wash holds you in such high esteem? It feels great, Derek. Thank you for that power chat. Anyway, gentlemen, continue talking about Iran and sanctions and all of that.
Oh, I don't know why this came to mind when we were talking, but talking about criminalizing the means. I mean, we don't want the government going around and charging stacks of dollar bills with being used in a crime, except they do that already with civil asset forfeiture. But that's just how the government is acting in this. And we all know that probably none of us here actually hold the government in high self-esteem and assume the government and government employees mean us no ill will. I mean,
they only want what's best for us, Chris.
No, the government is us. The government is us, right? How can you hate the government? It's you. No, that's not how this works at all. But I agree that we need to have more fungibility and the ability to control our own funds. That is the whole point of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. We are to be our own bank, so there are no third parties standing between me and you that can stop you from getting money from me. That is how it should be, and that's how we need to keep things going forward. But the government will do things like this, and they will always start with the obvious bad guys. I mean, nobody is going to feel sympathy for the guys who collected Sam ransom. I mean, these are not good people. These are not people anybody should idolize, or these are not heroes of the anarcho-capitalist revolution or the cryptocurrency revolution. These are bad guys. So nobody's going to feel bad about them for this. But we also have to think the fact that they're doing this, what does that mean going forward? And how many of the Bitcoins in circulation will suddenly become tainted as they keep moving forward, blacklisting addresses and outputs?
Did anybody notice or hear about the purposely trolling transactions that started rolling into those two addresses afterwards.
What? Walk me through what happened there.
They were sending small amounts, like dust amounts. One was somebody sent leet, like what 1337, and then another one sent from an address, or the change address was a vanity address that was 3 F-bomb was the first 5 digits of it. So yeah, so people instantly, because they're sanctioned not just to receive from, but to send to as well. You're not allowed to send to them. So what happens when you tell people not to do something? They immediately do it. So clearly it's doing nothing.
Was this something that was started on 4chan? We're very good at getting things like this started. I do. Sorry, what were you going to say, Chris?
Well, just people do have to realize that this blacklist, though, is an actual thing. If you try to use Changelly, Shapeshift, whatever, from addresses associated with this blacklist, your coins will be stuck there. And they will require that you prove your identity and prove where you got the money to get the funds as they go through the full KYC AML process on you while they're holding your funds hostage, because they are not allowed by law to return your money until you prove that. Yeah. So you have to be aware of that as you're going through this, because you can run into some trouble trying to move your funds around if you don't do it very carefully.
Can I drop one? I'm going to drop 2 names here of wallets to check out in regards to this. One is Samurai Wallet and one is Wasabi Wallet. And those are just things that help you maintain your privacy of your coins. I'm not condoning sending to and from these blacklisted addresses, but at the same time, you don't want to get stuck with somebody that was associated with a blacklisted address 3 hops before, and all of a sudden they've extended their reach to 4 or 5 hops, and all of a sudden you have no idea what's going on and your coins are no longer fungible. So people need to start looking at stuff like that.
Yeah, and talking about fungibility, that's an interesting topic as well. I mean, we've always talked about like the pseudo fungibility of Bitcoin, right? When you look at the earliest Bitcoin addresses, like it's very clear that there's going to be a premium on something that came from like the first Bitcoin, like there's never been sold since or moved since. So, I mean, there is a real non-fungibility of Bitcoin because you can identify addresses. And so I wonder whether this is going to change in future. I don't know if Bitcoin Core has plans to do anything about that. There are definitely other currencies out there that have definitely dealt with this. But, when you're dealing with blacklisted addresses, it becomes very real how non-fungible Bitcoin is.
To most people right now, it still isn't real. They don't necessarily care. Even hardcore people aren't necessarily that worried about it. And most people probably will not worry about it until it is an actual problem for far more than just a handful of people. And I would say that the Bitcoin Core people are not going to prioritize this over other things they have going.
Right. You're probably right there. We'll have to see what happens. I do want to move on as we've got a lot of topics to cover. So let's talk about the SEC, because we love talking about the SEC. So first of all, so I'm going to start with what happened at Consensus this week. So this was an interesting week. We had an awesome conference, Consensus Invest, but the conference is really geared towards big financial institutions. And I did a live stream there where I mentioned this and just said this isn't really something I cover a lot on my show. This is very much freedom kind of ethos here, rather than how can you be the best regulated or whatever. But it was a very interesting conference because you really did get another perspective and realize that there's a whole other demographic of people using cryptocurrency. And it was interesting because we also had Jay Clayton of the SEC. He is the chairman of the SEC. He gave remarks. I was very lucky immediately after he got off stage. I also did an interview with him. And one of the most interesting things from my interview was that I asked him, whether or not this increasing decentralization in the space, because he in the talk, and we'll talk about some of the things he talked about during the conference, but it was very much like SEC is paramount, don't fuck with us, we are, very serious people. And then in the interview afterwards, I said, that's really interesting. And also referencing like Ether Delta, for example, like things are becoming more and more decentralized in the space. For now, they can still target hybrid exchanges, for example. But what happens when things become completely decentralized? And I asked him, is he worried that the SEC might lose control completely of this space? And his answer was, no. And that was it. That was very interesting there. But let's talk about some of the things he mentioned in the conference. So it was very clear there's not going to be an ETF anytime soon. Mm-hmm. Do you guys want to talk about this at all?
I'm not surprised at all. I don't know why everybody thought that this was going to be, since the beginning of announcements of potential ETFs, everybody was always thinking it was going to be so fast. Do you not know how the government works? It's not a quick process to get things approved, to get rules changed. I think it's going to be quite some time before any of this actually gets cleared and listed. So I'm just going to express my total lack of surprise in hearing any of this news. I'll pass it on.
All right, let's see that total lack of surprise, Ben. I just want to see it for a second. That was very much a total lack of. I enjoyed that. That was great. So, Chris, you were about to say something?
Oh, it's not surprising. I mean, Jay is he's very much anti this, but also he's been very much of a spokesperson about how they're going to be in control of everything. And no, we don't need to issue any new laws or regulations about this because it's all clear as it is. And yeah, we all know that it's not clear as it is.
It's not clear. And that's one of the other things that I brought up with him as well. There's complete uncertainty about whatever the laws are that the SEC is putting forward, not just because you have, the
regulations.
Yeah. Well, you have Hester, who is saying like, oh, well, actually, I don't agree with the pronouncements that the SEC has made about this. We're going to revisit it. And then you have Jay Clayton coming out and saying, oh, actually, nothing the SEC says, even if it's said by someone who has the authority to speak on behalf of the SEC, is actually legally binding at all. And so it's like, so all of the pronouncements and press releases you've released that have said, we don't consider Ethereum to be a security. Like, does that mean that you have the ability to change your mind at any time? Because that's literally what Jay has said recently. It's just, it's crazy how much space they're trying to carve out for themselves, right? How much jurisdiction,
Well, that's how this crypto space has been over the last couple of years, is all the different governmental departments want to have this space under their own jurisdiction. And it's not going to be clear until judges start making rulings, and eventually somebody is willing to fight it in court and say, hey, wait a minute, this can't be all the things the government says it is because it's contradictory. And because of the way the SEC is handling this right now, and I think I mentioned this to you briefly while we were talking earlier this week, is the SEC is intentionally issuing low fines to everybody involved here so they don't fight it in court and risk bigger fines. Because this is part of their strategy to build up a case record. So when they finally do go after somebody bigger who might fight it, they can say, well, all these other guys just agreed with us, so who are you to disagree?
Right.
Yeah,
no,
they
that
agreed
very
with
clearly
you.
seems to be the strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way to look at this whole space really is in 2008, if you had asked the SEC if creating Bitcoin would have been legal, what would the response have been? Obviously, probably a giant no,
Right.
but it was created and it's possible and it can't be taken back. So they have to say, sure, we're fine with it. At what point is something created like decentralized exchanges where it's no longer even in the realm of possibility to stop it, and they just have to say, well, Yeah, we were actually totally cool with it the way that it's now rolled out. It's clear that this is fine, so we're just gonna roll with it. I think it's just a matter of time before something like that happens, and it's the in-between phase where it's the most dangerous. The people that are skirting those lines and using something that's decentralized but not. And you see something like Ether Delta where the SEC goes after the founder who should have been anonymous. I don't know what he was thinking. And he gets fined. Luckily, I saw the fines. And I've got to say, it probably could have been worse for him. But he should have been anonymous. And now they've just signaled to everybody, hey, do you want to build this? Make sure you don't let anybody know who you are. And now that's a known thing moving forward. And that's what people are going to do. People are going to build decentralized exchanges, but they're not going to let anyone know who they are.
And what was hilarious as well was all of the talk, especially when they talked about the CEO. They talked with the CEO of Bakkt and her husband, who happens to be the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, at the start of the conference. And the big concern was, well, market manipulation in Bitcoin. Am I right? Like, when are we going to get this under control? And then Jay Clayton was echoing this, saying we're not going to have an ETF until we have clear indication that there can't be market manipulation and it's like, really? You have giant financial institutions in the so-called regulated sector, and when I say regulated, I really just mean captured sector, who have a direct line of credit with the Federal Reserve. Like, there's tremendous amounts of market manipulation going on, but if it's approved by the government and the SEC, then it's okay. So really, the moral of this story is you want your organization to be big enough and important enough that you can put these politicians on your payroll, and then you're fine and you're deemed outside of the market manipulation area. Like, it's just the double standards going on at the moment. Talking about like manipulated markets is ridiculous.
Well, I mean, how often have bankers been, or banks themselves, been fined for forex, insider forex trading and manipulating the forex markets, or all the people at Goldman Sachs who were fined, and maybe one guy went to jail, I can't remember exactly, for manipulating the gold and silver markets. And then, Deutsche Bank, just this week, they, had their offices raided for a money laundering probe. I mean, all of this stuff is in the regulated markets.
And I'm sorry, but isn't the biggest market manipulator of all the Federal Reserve, that literally, manipulates the price of the US dollar and the credit rate? And it's just... the interest rates and I mean, it's insane that we're all in outrage and we think that the government is a solution, when it's the government putting their hands on everything that creates these problems, that creates these augmentations in the markets that lead to giant crashes. People say, like, I was going to talk about this later, but maybe now is a good time. You just recently had a pronouncement from UBS's Paul Donovan, who said, I come to bury Bitcoin, not to praise it. And he says it was obvious that the Bitcoin rally would end badly for people not protected by any kind of regulation and who got sucked into the process, he says. And I'm just thinking, I'm sorry, but if the US government had been regulating this market, what? So people would have had all these malinvestments in ICOs and whatnot, and they would have just pumped that so that it could never crash to protect these people, so people didn't lose their money? Because that's exactly what they did with the housing bubble. That's what they've done every single time. They've fixed these bubbles. Oh my God, it's ridiculous. The TARP bailouts. Look at what they did on Wall Street with all of the financial institutions. It's crazy that he's saying that people were not protected in this way and they got sucked in and it's bad. I think it's great that the market has shifted and rebalanced, and we're getting a lot of this malinvestment out of the way so that we can find a proper price, rather than having the price signal completely just like obfuscated and augmented and changed by intervening governing force like the Federal Reserve.
It's not manipulation when it's as designed.
Right.
And this is entirely how the Federal Reserve was designed. They were designed, and our unbacked dollar was created so they could manipulate things just this way. This is as intended. This is what they wanted to have happen 100 years ago on Jekyll Island. I mean, this is exactly what the goal was. And I remember this was sold to us back in 1929, because we all remember 1929.
Right, it's a great year for
but remember, it was sold to us as we need to have this so that we don't have these crashes.
Oh my gosh.
So that we don't have the market cycle. And they've been worse, they've lasted longer, and they've hurt more people every time since. I mean, if you look at the crashes during the 1800s compared to the crashes during the 1900s, there's noticeable differences. And, you know, you want to read some great books on this. Both Bob Murphy and Tom Woods have written some awesome stuff on this from the 1800s. So could strongly suggest reading it. But it's just important to know that the system we've been working on is built on a lie that's 100 years old or more.
Absolutely.
I wanted to say on the note of the fact that Bitcoin's now dead, because thank God they told us. Oh my God.
Thank goodness. I was
man.
so worried for a second there. And, you know, they just let us know. Now we've got the memo and we can all rest assured and maybe pay our respects. Because, guys, I don't know if you knew this, but Bitcoin is dead apparently. So let's just take a moment.
I can move on with my life now. I've wasted the last 4.5, 5 years of my life. What was I thinking? Well, I can pack up now. I'll take these pictures off the wall. I'm going to tear it all down, you guys. Also,
thank goodness they told me, because otherwise I would have kept using it as a currency. But they told me that it's dead. So I guess I can't do that anymore. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, wait, I should tell the people who just sent me power chats in cryptocurrency. Guys, didn't you know that cryptocurrency is dead?
You're sending dead money.
Oh, good boy, oh boy.
Okay, so do you guys know Rodolfo Novak, creator of OpenDime and the Cold Card wallet? Their one is basically a bearer asset. It's a USB key that's a bearer asset for Bitcoin, so you can actually hand-to-hand give somebody Bitcoin without exposing the private keys and provably not showing that nobody has ever seen the private keys. Basically, he's up in Canada. He's got some great projects on the go, but he on Twitter asked everybody if they could figure out who could do the math. If you had put $50 every single time a mainstream economist or pundit said Bitcoin was dead, how much money would you have made? And the answer was, if you had put $50 every time there was an article saying that Bitcoin was dead, you would have made $217,000.
Wow.
I'm gonna send the link to that tweet in the chat on YouTube here, so everybody can check it out.
Wow, that's amazing. I do want to quickly give a shout out. So some people have been using the Big Backer side. You guys are so awesome. Also get content creators on here so that they can all benefit from using this. But huge shout out, 23 Uvers. And you know what, 23 Uvers, I don't know how to pronounce your name, so you're gonna have to write in the chat. I'm just gonna pronounce it as it looks. But he sent a pledge through. Huge thank you. That's amazing. We have a note from RLAMASB. You have to tell me how to pronounce that too, and what your corresponding YouTube address is, so I can write to you in there, saying always a pleasure to listen to Naomi and Zaphoid. Sorry, Ben, you were left out of that. It's not a pleasure to listen to you, but it is a pleasure to listen to Chris and myself. No, it's awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And you know what? That is our first person to send Bitcoin Cash. And this is an interesting note, because a lot of people talk about how Bitcoin isn't useful for smaller transactions these days because of high transaction fees. And Bitcoin Cash is a lot more useful because it's a lot lower fees. But overwhelmingly, the support has been coming in Bitcoin and not Bitcoin Cash. So I found that very interesting. But this is the first person to use Bitcoin Cash. So there you go. And then we have a message from Polly. Oh, Polly, who says, Naomi, do you think cussing like a down under sailor is a sign of intelligence or just Tourette's? I think it's probably a sign of Tourette's, Polly, if we're being honest. So just bear with me, and I appreciate your support.
I said the IRS pooped the bed. I was very careful.
That's right. Well, I mean, I think I've been swearing left, right, and center. So it's, there we go. So does someone just say my music videos are terrible in a good way? I'm not sure how to take it. Thank you, I think. I'm not sure. But anyway, so they said that there's no Bitcoin ETF anytime soon. They're saying that regulated exchanges are needed. Again, we've talked about this. What do they mean by regulated exchange? They mean regulated like Bernie Madoff was regulated, because they did a bang up job there. Well done, government. They talked about like the rise of Corpo Coin, which is interesting. So, I mean, we are seeing that a little bit. We are seeing a lot of institutional players come in. You've got Fidelity, and you've got, I mean, there are lots of people in the space now. And I think Consensus Invest was a testament to that. They kind of showcased how many people are interested in this. Although we have yet to see people really get involved, and that's because these players just move so much more slowly than the startups. You know, by the time they're discussing things, it's 3 years later when the board approves it, and by then we've got, you know, Bitcoin 10.0 happening. Like, so we've got ICO funded startups who should go see the SEC ASAP. I mean, basically his message was, hey guys, we want control of everything. So you don't want to risk that you're in our jurisdiction, but you think you're not. Just presume you are. That was the message of the day. Presume you're under our jurisdiction, which I took a lot of issue with, but very interesting.
That's kind of how regulators play, though. They just they want everybody to come along with them, and by doing so, you are opting in to playing by those rules. That's kind of how it was rolling out here in Canada as well, because they didn't have any specific regulation around that stuff. And then it took certain companies approaching them saying, hey, can we do this, for them to figure out how to write their laws. And they basically wrote their laws around the companies that were trying to play nice, and they kind of screwed themselves. So it's very interesting seeing that play out, but more or less it's an admission that you're willing to go along with what's being said. Let's face it, if the entire world tomorrow was like, hey, we don't want to play by these rules, it would be very difficult to enforce them. So but at the same time, do you want to be that one entity that says, hey, we're taking a stand, and then you're behind bars, right? So it's this interesting fine line. So
well, that is what they rely on. I mean, and it is mobster tactics. It's, you don't want to be the one guy standing out to say that you will take a stand here, because, you know, and the tall tree gets the axe, the sticking nail that's sticking out gets the hammer. You know,
I am Spartacus, and nobody else stands up.
Exactly. That would have made for a very different movie.
Absolutely. So the CoinDesk actually did a great recap of Clayton's remarks after the fact. They had Caitlin Long on there. I'm a huge fan of Caitlin. I just think she's wonderful. Has just done so much amazing stuff for Wyoming. And I have a video with her coming out maybe next week, maybe the week after, talking about regulation and comparing Wyoming to New York regulation as well, which is interesting. But you can check out their overview of basically of Clayton's remarks. But one thing I do want to go on to now is that on the one hand, you have SEC and in particular Clayton saying, oh, well, you know, we have 100% control and, you know, you should fear us and all of this stuff. And then another bit of information that came out this week was, let me pull this up here. So the US denies SEC push for injunction against crypto startup. So while you have the SEC saying we are in control, and then you have the courts saying, oh, actually, you didn't prove at all that they violated securities laws. So we're actually denying this this preliminary injunction. So that's an interesting turn of the tables, and maybe we will see the courts actually coming to back us up. You know, Zaphoid, before you said that this is really just them testing the waters, and they're doing these little slap on the wrist things, and you know, I'll fine you $3, you naughty boys. And then, you know, people aren't going to fight that. They're not going to pay lawyers to pay small fees. They're just going to do that and then comply, and then they're let off the hook, which sets a terrible precedent down the line when they start ramping up the fines and all of that. And then people, you know, you've set precedents by that stage. You have like a dozen cases where they say, well, actually, these ones all complied. They all agreed. So, so maybe the courts may help us out a little bit here.
I worry about hoping that the courts will help us out.
I worry about putting our trust in any sort of government structure.
I worry about the thing that you said about the stuff is what I'm worrying about. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't bank on it entirely. Maybe, sure, this is a nice little check and balance that's playing out right now at the moment, but I wouldn't bank on that being the case always moving forward. And I think that we should continue to treat the space as if there's going to be an adversarial government looking at it at all times.
Yeah.
The courts, I mean, it's been proven for a long time that the checks and balances in our system are more along the lines of I'll help you out here and you help me out there.
He checks and pats on the back.
Yes, exactly. But this is one of those things where at least they're sort of playing the game. I don't know enough about the case, why this one actually is making it in front of a judge, as opposed to the other ones that just settled. So Blockvest appears to be taking at least somewhat of a stand here. And this isn't actually saying that they're right. I mean, the judge didn't, agree that they were going to win. They agreed that, yeah, there's enough to take this to court and there's not enough evidence here to issue an injunction. That's all he said. And particularly that there's not a likelihood that they will continue with the actions that the injunction would be against anyway. So there's no real reason for injunction, which is a little bit different than saying, hey, they're right, you're wrong. But at least it is in front of the court. Hopefully Blockvest has some good lawyers. I honestly don't know anything about what they did. It read very strangely to me, so hopefully it's not one of those slam dunk cases for the SEC that will set some bad precedent. But we will just have to see, and it will be good to keep an eye on it at least, just so we're there to do damage control if it does go poorly.
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, we all just have to keep in mind that the government wants to have as much control over this as they can. So we shouldn't presume that they're going to be like we're going to have some savior from within the ranks saying like, oh, we'll actually protect your freedom, because that hasn't happened to date in a lot of different sectors of our lives. So it's very unlikely to happen in this very esoteric, complex world that is cryptocurrency. So let's move on here. We're talking still about the SEC, but the SEC fines Floyd Mayweather, DJ Khaled for ICO promotions. So that's interesting. I mean, back in November, end of last year, SEC put out a statement cautioning celebrities from backing ICOs, saying that it could be basically saying it's illegal. And so then since then, they've actually fined, well, how much is it? So Mayweather will pay $300,000 in disgorgement and $300,000 in penalties and a few other little things. So basically giving back all of the money that they received from ICOs and then paying fines on top of that, which is very interesting.
Can I jump in again with my total lack of surprise?
Wait, let's show this. Ben? You have to talk so you get on the camera.
Oh, yeah. So here we go.
Be unsurprised noisingly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Ready? Total lack of surprise.
Oh, wow, guys. That was fantastic. That was a lack of surprise.
Yeah. I mean, who could have possibly seen it coming with all the warnings and such? Nobody thought it was a good idea when Floyd Mayweather was tweeting and Instagramming pictures of him on his private jet with stacks of cash, flouting an ICO in the comments.
Swimming in diamonds.
Obviously. So what I'm curious about, though, is does this set the precedent for them to come after YouTubers that have done the same?
Well, I mean, there are different laws surrounding that as well. So apparently it's illegal to put something in print without disclosing any compromising ties. But the same laws don't yet apply to video. And that's interesting. I'm not actually sure of the laws around that, but that would be interesting to look into.
Does the text in the description of the video count? Because that's what the Instagram post would have been, correct?
Yeah. I mean, that would count, I would presume, but I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. But I think people need to just be really, really careful here.
I have a few YouTubers in my head that are probably furiously deleting videos right now.
Absolutely, I would presume so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what they're talking about is they need to have absolute disclosure. So I think the laws applying to text at the moment mean that you have to say how much you received, that you did receive it, that it's not an unbiased endorsement, that it is actually paid, that everything has to be really laid out. So I think YouTubers who disclose that information, this is sponsored by XYZ, it's unclear how much disclosure they have to do at this stage. As I said, it doesn't currently apply to video. So I mean, I would presume that YouTubers should just be careful. Make sure that you are being honest about this. When someone does pay for an interview, let people know that they're a sponsor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like the moral thing to do, at least. But yeah, I don't know. I would take this a little bit further with celebrities, though, is that we probably shouldn't, take their recommendations for ICOs and cryptocurrencies.
Wait
we
a
probably
second.
also shouldn't take.
Wait, Chris, are you trying to insinuate that Mayweather may not be an expert in cryptocurrency?
Hey, I get all my financial advice from Paris Hilton, everybody.
Yeah.
Me too.
I would say we shouldn't take their financial advice nor their political advice. So let's just, ignore them when they start bringing up politics too, and all our lives will be a lot better.
Yeah.
So let's move on there. So I did mention Paul Donovan's obituary. It's very, very sad. Let's talk a little bit. So we've got to be careful in this space, not just from scammers, but we've got mining malware that is getting more and more advanced, I guess. Researchers are now saying that mining malware is evolving. So let's talk a little bit about this and what people need to be aware of and looking out for.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was trying to quickly look through this. Is this in reference to mining malware as far as stuff that will infect your computer and then use its resources to mine said cryptocurrency back to the creator of the malware?
Yes.
Yes, I presume so.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what this one is. This isn't the banners that mine when you're on the website. This is actual installed malware.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, this kind of stuff always continues to evolve, doesn't it? There's always new ways to attack people via the internet, and with the advent of decentralized money, it was only natural that there's incentive for people to be ahead of the curve and create these kind of things. So I think it now puts more of an onus on people to better secure their digital lives. You do have to worry about this kind of stuff. And this isn't just individuals, but it's companies that get hit with malware that locks down all of their company records and so on and so forth. It's a constant worry. And so in the short term, yes, this is a worry. But I think what we see happening moving forward will be that people start to take the security of their devices much more seriously, because there is people that are incentivized monetarily to break into your device and utilize the resources therein, or steal your coins or whatever. I think that people really need to start to consider these things, and they will if they get hit. And it's only a matter of time before everybody gets hit if they're not taking security seriously.
Yeah, I just want to take the opportunity. We've had several community members come to us trying to figure out how they got infected. And there are a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, I don't want to, obviously name names here, but you might download some perfectly legal videos off of a BitTorrent, and that might actually be a virus, because that AVI file could actually prompt your Windows Media Player to do some action using memory overflow, or it might even be more simple, and that it has changed its name to something that actually reads right to left instead of left to right, and it actually starts off with exe. And we've actually seen that several times. And do not store your coins on your computer using every day. That's just not something you want to do, because there's too many things that can happen on your everyday machine that can compromise your coins, because the people who are in these communities probably know more about your wallets than you do.
Yeah. So just lesson of the day, just be really, really careful out there. These things are getting much smarter, and you need to protect yourselves. So let's keep going. Talking about protection, we have privacy-oriented currencies like Zcash. So Coinbase adds Zcash to their pro trading exchange. And I'm in two minds about this. So I'm a big fan of Zcash. I think their sapling is awesome. And I think that it just makes using the privacy aspect of Zcash so much easier and faster, that it's just such a great improvement. I'm really excited about this currency. And you've got to wonder, if you're using a privacy-oriented currency, why you would do it through a very large institutional entity like Coinbase. Like, is this just a honeypot for attracting people who would use, privacy-oriented currencies so that they can associate an address with them? Like, I mean, obviously, I don't think that's a conspiracy. I'm not being a conspiracy theorist at the same time. I think it's great that Coinbase has added Zcash, because I'm a big fan of it. But I do wonder who's going to use it there.
Well, yeah, you're right when it comes to why would you use this on Coinbase, especially.
Like, I presume that it's just going to be like as a speculative thing in that case, right?
It would have to be, because if you're sending within Coinbase, then obviously there is KYC, AML there. When you send actually out from Coinbase, you cannot send to an anonymous address. It has to be what's it called? A transparent address. Yes. So you have to send out to a transparent address. You can't not do that. So for those that are buying Zcash on Coinbase, it's clear that it has to be speculation. And Coinbase is offering this coin, saying we don't, more or less through their actions, they're saying that we don't approve, or we cannot approve of the of the privacy features of Zcash, but we want you to speculate that somebody will really like it. So, I mean, they're encouraging people to speculate on the thing that they're not condoning, I suppose. It's an interesting dichotomy there, kind of.
It's not necessarily that they're not condoning it. It's that they don't want to have to explain to their regulatory friends that they're allowing people to send anonymous transactions off of their platform.
Well, I mean, I presume that they would be able to implement Zcash, but just not add the privacy functions. I'm not actually sure how the technicalities of it work, but maybe they could just shut off that side of things and use it. But then it's like, what does Zcash have to offer once you take away the privacy functions? Like, that's the point. That's the point of Zcash, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is the point.
And anybody holding Zcash in their Coinbase wallet, if somebody is holding, say, Bitcoin or Litecoin or whatever in their Coinbase wallet, and they're using that as their main wallet, you could technically still argue the fact that they're using it as a currency via that platform. But when it comes to Zcash, the whole point of it is the privacy. So why would you switch from one of those other currencies to Zcash, given that it's a privacy coin? It would be pure speculation. So you've got to assume anybody using Zcash on Coinbase.
Oh no, you cut out a little bit there, Ben. I lost the end of you.
Basically, I was just saying that, more or less, if you're buying Zcash on Coinbase, it's likely for speculation. I doubt that anybody is going to be buying it on Coinbase to use it for privacy, because you cannot, unless you're buying it, sending it off, and then bumping it to some obscured addresses afterwards.
Right. So, I mean, great that they're adding it. I like seeing Zcash get more visibility and have more places to use it. We'll have to see what happens there. I do want to mention, so someone actually brought this up in the comments, and I do want to just bring it up. So, Dan Larimer, he obviously he created EOS, and now it's in the news at the moment about how he's creating a new coin again. And so that's interesting as well. He says, I mean, he's a developer for Blockvest, which is the company that runs EOS, and he has plans to develop a new cryptocurrency side project. And he just announced this 2 days ago. And he's been very vague about these plans for this hypothetical token so far, so we don't have too much information to report on it, but just that it would be immutable, non-programmable, and limited to a currency role. which makes me think that it's Bitcoin. But I'm not sure whether I'm missing something there.
He also said that crypto people would hate it.
Oh God.
I have a list of the 14 features he said would be in it, or I guess there's 15 to use the number 13 twice. Complete privacy, user-created tokens, potential for gambling acts, 2 transactions per second per account. I assume that's what 2 TRX means. No staking or voting, 200 millisecond confirmation and irreversible, unknowable exact supply, estimates only, generally deflationary, require initial trusted setup, not nation security until new supply enters market. Security would likely take nation-state level resources to crack, no new crypto math, tech foundation already used by governments for most secure infrastructure, no fees, and no censorship. I guess the feature list is not something that makes it stick out among most of the other privacy offerings out there.
Yeah, I mean, I have reservations about EOS as well. Just the whole centralized side of it. I don't know too much about it, and I really need to look into it more. But I do take issue with how very few people seem to be able to be in control of it. But maybe we'll keep up to date with this new project as we learn more about it, and we'll let people know. But if he prefaced it with, "I think crypto people will hate it," then I mean, I don't report much on XRP either. So we'll see how much we actually get into this. We've got a heap of stuff still to cover, so I just want to breeze through some things now. Very quick announcement. You had Steemit laying off 70% of their company. I think this was announced yesterday or the day before.
Wasn't that also a Dan Larimer project?
Oh, was
it? Yes.
Yeah,
Dan
Larimer. I mean, to be fair, though, I love Steemit. Like, I'm a huge Steemit fan because I post my content there, and out of all of the platforms for content creators out there, that's where I have the most success. It seems to have a great network. People take issue with the whales, how they control everything. That is true to an extent. So I've also been looking into minds.com and had some success there as well. But Steemit still has been more successful as far as I've found. So I still really enjoy it. So I'm sad to see that, but I hope that this just means refocusing and then just getting better as a platform rather than this being like the end of Steemit, because I would hate to see that. I think it's a great resource for people.
Well, that's just Steemit itself. That's not necessarily the blockchain underneath it, and there are a whole bunch of other platforms that operate on top of it versus just the Steemit site you're used to. So some people are saying it maybe
doesn't die.
Yeah, we all do, but some people are saying this will be the best thing ever for it, and whatever. It just
best thing ever. 70% of the workforce going. Like what?
Yeah.
I know that I think Bitbacker has been talking to Andrew Levine about potentially adding Steem as an option on their site as well. So that's interesting. So sorry about this right now. If you can hear this, this is the construction that we deal with every time. So I'm going to quickly announce the next topic and then leave it to you guys and then put my thing on mute because this is unbearable for everyone. South Korea is testing blockchain-based voting at the moment, kind of like what Thailand did before. I'm going on mute.
You go ahead.
No, go for it, Ben.
I'm interested in blockchain-based voting. I don't yet know how there's some issues there that I'm curious about how they would solve them, and perhaps either of you could speak to this. But one of them would be, obviously you have to have privacy, you have to have ways of not coercing somebody to allocate their vote somewhere. You have to take into consideration that when somebody's casting their vote, if it's blockchain based, how are you going to mitigate things like, well, you need to identify that somebody is eligible to vote, but you also you need to obscure that identity so that person cannot be coerced to vote a certain way, because then it would be provable that that person had voted yes or no on a particular topic or for a particular candidate. So I'm out to lunch when it comes to blockchain voting. I'm still very on the fence about it, and I'd be curious to hear you guys' thoughts as to what you think here.
Those are certainly very real potential issues that also exist in our current voting system. The way there are ways that we can do it very well, and Smart Cash is actually experimenting with our own on-chain voting. But just like with Bitcoin, there's no need to associate a particular name with an address. You can do that with these government-backed blockchains. It just depends on how they track it internally, because as we did talk about earlier, any data the government has is likely to be data everybody will have eventually. So depending on how the government wants to secure it, whether or not you're getting your voter ID the same way you'd get your driver's license and your voting key or whatever, or whether you register it once and it's never tied to you in the future, but then how do they determine that you didn't get another one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of challenges there privacy-wise, but it seems that it's an interesting trend. And if done right, I could see how blockchain voting would actually solve a lot of the issues we've seen in America, particularly in this last election.
I've looked into this as well because I did an interview with Varys recently, and it's very clear that there are several steps. Like, I get what you're saying, Ben, that you have to first identify who people are and that they're registered, but I think that's a separate issue, and you have lots of decentralized identity companies at the moment who are doing that. So if there's a way to verify something and then hash it so the information is no longer available for people, but it still has a check mark of being verified, you could then use that and integrating it with the blockchain mechanism. I think that it's going to be a long time before we see anything like this in the States or anything actually succeeding. We have seen it so slightly, a little. So Thailand used blockchain-supported electronic voting systems in the primaries recently, a couple of weeks ago, and that was really interesting. But we're really at the early stages of this, and as you said, it is not clear whether or not we have like a secure system yet. But I think it's coming. I am very hopeful.
Yeah, it would be very difficult to argue the outcome of an election after the fact if you could prove that everybody that was allowed to vote did vote, and other than social engineering, which if the voting population is able to be steered one way or another because of a few memes, then perhaps that's just the way the election should go, I guess. I don't know, but it would be very difficult to argue that an election was rigged if you had it provably secured on a blockchain that had been vetted through a lot of other processes. I think the best way to do it would be to start small, right? You don't want to have a countrywide election for the first time on a blockchain. maybe start municipal.
Right. And that's something that Varys has mentioned as well, that they have zero knowledge at the moment. So the idea that you would be able to have a vote that couldn't be then tied back to you, but if you held the keys to your vote, you would be able to look and actually confirm in the results that your vote was actually counted in the way that you intended for it to be counted. So it's interesting. There are lots of different companies exploring this. And I like that we have all these competing companies trying out different methods, because I think competition is great, and we can see, who succeeds in having a system that works. Yeah. All right. So moving on, just two quick topics before we have to wrap up because we're running out of time. So we've got Nasdaq and VanEck partnering to launch futures contracts, which is interesting. Again, it's the second largest stock exchange in the world, which is partnering with investment management firm VanEck. And they're bringing a bunch of new financial products to the market. So again, just like institutions coming on board, it's pretty big news.
Yeah, I'm gonna pass this down the line first. I want to hear. I want to hear what Chris has to say about this first.
It's just more of the big boys trying to get into this game, which, from my perspective, is I'm not a huge fan of them, but at the same time, they're going to get involved one way or the other. And I just see these people getting involved more and more because they want to be the ones that has the best futures contract, and they hope that it will stabilize things enough that they can be the one to get their EFT through as well. So that's what I see happening here, is they're trying to force things so they can make money off of the EFT.
Yeah. I'm not super excited or interested about a lot of the institutional stuff. I mean, I know it's an inevitability that everybody's going to be jumping in on these markets, but I don't think that if they took another however many years to be jumping in, it would really be that much of a detriment. In fact, I'd probably prefer it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I hear announcements about futures and everything, I don't even think that when things like this launch initially will have that big of an impact on prices either way. To tell you the truth, I think that sure they'll be sitting there, but do we really believe that the second that these things launch, there's going to be such crazy demand that all of a sudden it's going to be a complete moonshot? Probably not. I think it's going to take some time.
So you're not somebody that blames our drop on the fact that our high was when the first ETF future closed?
No. I think we did that all to ourselves. I think it was very much a symptom of every person wanting to buy whatever went up the most that particular day. And I think it's now a symptom of that. Everybody just wants to sell everything. And the people that are left standing when everything finally bottoms out, which may be soon, may not, those are the people that are obviously sticking around and doing their reading and learning about the space and staying curious. So yeah, no, I don't give too much credence to these type of financial products being rolled out right now. But I will say, and I do believe that this will happen, but eventually when there is another big bull run and there's a lot of FOMO and people are rushing into the markets, all of a sudden there's all these additional on-ramps which can kind of propel things even faster and create even bigger manias than we've seen in the past. And so I think while it won't affect things in the short term, I think when since we're allowed to swear on here, shit hits the fan, it will hit in a spectacular fashion.
Well, the thing about futures and this, the Nasdaq one, the VanEck one, is not going to be physically settled. So
it's IOUs.
Yep. So it doesn't really affect the supply at all, unlike some of the others. So it's, from my perspective, that's even more useless and less Bitcoiny. But the main difference we have with the next bull run is that there will be a mechanism for large players to short the market, and which theoretically can slow things down. We'll just have to see if it actually does or not. Hello.
Well,
do you have your honk if you love Bitcoin sign up?
That's it. No, they're honking to say hi to my sister who just tuned into the live chat and is saying, "How did I get here?" So don't think she's ever watched one of my live streams before, not just because it's currently like 5 o'clock in the morning in Australia where she is right now. So why are you awake, Rebecca? And who has a better singing voice? Actually, my sister does, to be honest. I may have done all the training, but she's incredible. So hi, Rebecca. Lovely to have you here. You probably found your way through the Bitbacker site because I've been throwing that link out there and people can watch the live stream through there. I just want to move on to the last topic of the day because we're running out of time here. Or should I say run out of time, but we're going anyway because we love talking about the news. Ohio, they became the first US state to allow businesses to pay taxes with Bitcoin, which may be the most useless thing ever because who's going to want to spend their Bitcoin on taxes? That is just a terrible exchange right there. But let's talk about that.
The government can pry my private keys from my cold, dead hands.
I'll give a slightly different perspective since I don't make anything except crypto. Being able to pay taxes in crypto would be at least one fewer step for me. Mm-hmm. That's the only real benefit, because if I have to sell one way or the other to pay my stupid taxes, then I might as well not have to touch fiat any more than I have to.
Well, that's great as well, but I mean, doesn't that mean that you have to sell your Bitcoin to the government? That just seems so dirty, right?
Yes, it does, and I probably, and since I'm not in
But
Ohio,
paying
it's not
taxes
going to
in
come up for me.
general, yeah,
Yeah.
paying taxes in general
But
is kind of dirty. But
my favorite part of this, though, is not touched, but I think I remember reading something from Krugman back in 2013 talking about, how the, US dollar is different from other currencies because one of the things that gives its value is people have to have it and thus buy it to pay their taxes. So by allowing tax paying directly in crypto, that takes away one of the potential advantages that fiat has over crypto.
yeah.
At least to Krugman. I completely disagree with him on that topic, but still,
Yeah, no,
it's nice to be able to beat them
that
at
is
their
a
own game.
great point. I mean, the only thing people have to say about fiat to defend it is, well, it's useful because I can pay my taxes in it. Because they all know that it's been debased so thoroughly and is so easily manipulated by a bunch of people we don't even get to vote in. Not that that would help. That it's completely worthless. Like, it wasn't Friedman who said that the government, or maybe I think it was Hayek actually, who said that the government who managed to take a perfectly valuable asset and ruin it by printing money on it, like talking about paper as an actual valuable asset. And so, the fact that the only thing people have to say to defend fiat is, well, I can pay my taxes in it. I can pay my taxes in Bitcoin now if I live in Ohio. So that's actually quite interesting. All right, you've convinced me, Zappoid. I thought it was completely ridiculous and stupid, but you've turned me.
I guess anything that proves Krugman wrong is a bonus in my book. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we've run out of time. It's a whole lot of stuff that we covered in this show, but really, really, really thankful for all of you for tuning in. Huge thank you in particular to Derek Belcher for using the Power Chat function. Relamisp is their name.
What was that again?
Relamisp is their name. And before I was like, send me your YouTube thing so I know who you are, but I actually know who it is now because I saw the photo. So there you go. And Polly, who made fun of my swearing. A huge thank you to all of you. It's wonderful. And to Uvers for using the subscription function. The idea is so that people start to use crypto for patronage of artists and content creators rather than crypto, which I think is just rather than fiat. And I just think that's a wonderful turn of events. I mean, you have people like Andreas Antonopoulos, who spends his whole life promoting cryptocurrency and yet makes most of his money on Patreon, and his YouTube page is an advertisement for Patreon. And I can't fault him for that, but I can fault the crypto space for not having developed something similar in the crypto space, because content creators don't really have a choice, but now they do. They could use Bitbacker, so I'm very excited to see this take off. Someone asked for my Bitbacker address. I'm just going to put that in there. Ben, are you on Bitbacker yet?
I'm going to try it.
You better try it. So you're going to let us know if you have a live stream, then people can power chat you. So let me know and I will send that link out so that people can find you and test out the platform. A lot of great feedback so far from people who have been testing this out. And I think Ken Bozak used it the other day, got his first power chat, which is really exciting. Hey. So lots of people just starting to get involved. I just like that we have a choice now. You don't have to use the super chat if you don't want. You don't have to use Patreon. There are other alternatives. So definitely check it out and spread the word to other content creators so they don't lose 10% as they do with Patreon or 30% as they do with YouTube Super Chats, which is huge. So huge thank you to you guys. You're just wonderful. And huge thank you to everyone who's in the chat there. Really, really awesome to have you here. You guys are just so, so wonderful. I love you. Huge thank you, Ben and Chris, for being on here and sharing your expertise and insights, the news this week. Wonderful to have you here as well.
Thanks for having me.
Always happy to be here.
Absolutely. And another hello to my sister, even though she said she found my chat accidentally. Don't know how you can accidentally stumble into someone's live chat, but I'm glad she did. She's a hiker, long distance hiker, actually, very well known in the hiking space because she's walked from Mexico to Canada twice.
Oh my God.
Wow. So kind of the opposite. Like if she's a nomad and I'm a digital nomad, she's like, I'm going to disconnect and I'm going to have my phone tied to my hand and have like 17 devices on at the same time so I can keep up with markets and social media and stuff. So very different in that respect, but thank you for being here. And thank you all of you. Have a wonderful weekend and go and enjoy the rest of your Friday night. And I'll see you at the next live stream or on one of the wonderful social media platforms out there. See you, everyone.